So I am just browsing through once again one of the best books I've ever read in my life. And even though I wrote it, when I read it, I'm kind of like, fuck, that's a good book. That's a fucking good book. It speaks about so many very, very powerful subject matter. It is an immensely incredible, broad accumulation, conglomerate of some of the greatest and most powerful subjects that we can study as human beings. Particularly if we are interested in ontology, what it is to be a human being, and spirituality. Those things combined, along with science and philosophy and human psychology, and it's all in here, people. And I get it now. I really do get it. Why very, very few people, there's only a couple of you, tentatively coming forward to talk about the content of this book, having read some of it, because most of it would be massively over and above what you are ready for at this moment in time with your personal development. And you know, I can kind of forget the massive journey that I have travelled in my life. You know, I've not just been this sedentary guy that's lived in one city and has only travelled to a few package holidays here and there, you know, to Spain or to, I don't know, Vienna or somewhere like that, just on a little bit of sightseeing. And that's as far and as extensive as their travel goes. But when you have travelled alone with a rucksack and a sleeping bag all around the world, then you start to learn a thing or two about life. And so there are so many books that I could write. I have over here diaries piled that high, A4 diaries, which are this big, and they are chock-a-block full of my excursions through Bulgaria and Egypt and Africa, South America and Guatemala, places like that. And then, of course, there's so many other facets of my life, which I may one day write about. But incessantly I'm appealing to you to write reviews, and 11 of you, no, I think there's been 9 of you that's wrote a review, and 2 viewers put shocking, completely unrealistic assessments down. They never wrote a review. They wouldn't dare do that, and probably they've never even read the book. You know, they just bought the Kindle so they could have access to the review. And then they put a 2 or 3 out of 5 down, and one reader states that it's got too many excerpts of other people's work in it which are completely irrelevant. Well, I mean, what I've done in this book is, because I've had such a vast amount of experience, I have read a vast amount of very intelligent people's works, and I have discovered that the experiences that I've had are very much in line with the hypothesis and the knowledge of some of the greatest thinkers on the planet. And so when I have concluded something myself, I go, aha, well, Carl Jung said that. And then I go, well, Sigmund Sigmund Freud said that, and then Rupert Sheldrake said that, and Edgar Cayce said that, and Plato said this, and all that different sorts of things. And so I've compiled short excerpts of their work to give people an idea of what I'm speaking about and let them know what is out there. And so if anybody wants an introduction into many of these greatest thinkers that have ever lived. Now, the contents, ladies and gentlemen, I'll show you, because like I always say, you've got minds like goldfish. This is the table of contents which is in this book. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and a half pages. There is about 300 subtitles to the information what is in this book, and there is an incomprehensible amount of stuff. And so for you people out there who aren't seriously versed in life, seriously versed in many of the greatest of intellects on the planet, then this stuff is just going to be like double Dutch to you. It's Chinese. It's too complex, it's too deep, it's too vast, it's too broad. And you see what happened with me, people, many years ago, when I was in the dark night of the soul and I was incessantly reading 12 hours every single day. I read for 3 years. That's all I did in my dark night of the soul. And then when I was coming out of that for a further 4 years, I continued to read, but not for 12 hours a day, but maybe for 5 or 6 hours a day. And so I read thousands and thousands of books. And when I would read books from the greatest authors that we've been blessed with, and these people were writing in the 1800s and the early 1900s, and they had proper educations from proper universities, and they were very, very well read, and they would just off the bat just be mentioning this great person, that great person, this great person's work, and that great person said this. And it was readily assumed that because you were reading this variety of book, then of course you would know about all those people. Of course you would speak Latin, of course you would speak French, and that's why lots of quotes were in Latin and French, and they never even bothered to translate them, because it was just a given that educated people would know all this stuff. Now there are very, very few educated people, and most of you will be aware that there's shocking level of education in the universities. But what I did was that when I was reading these things and I was coming upon these names incessantly, well, I had to go out and buy the book pertaining to these names, otherwise I just didn't get what they were speaking about. And what happens is, people, if you read a book and the book says, oh, it mentions Jim Carrey, if you know very little about Jim Carrey, I'm just saying modern times, you'll all know who Jim Carrey is, but if I mentions empedocles, then you'll know who that was, would you? So oh, Jim Carrey said this. Well, who the fuck's Jim Carrey? Well, if you've read Jim Carrey's autobiography, then, that's where Jim Carrey's coming from. Then Anthony Hopkins did this and reckons that. Who the fuck's Anthony Hopkins? Oh, but if you've read those books, then all of a sudden it colours your world. And these words are no longer dead ends. They're portals into an enormous amount of information, 200 or 300 pages of information if you've read the books. And so that's what intellectuals do. They read all these books, and so when somebody mentions this person or that person, for instance, People mentioning Dostoevsky. Well, fuck me, I had to go out and buy, you know, half a dozen Dostoevsky books. Then they mentioned Charles Dickens, and I've got to go and buy Charles Dickens, you know, and see what all that's about. By the time you've done all that, well, you've got a good idea about lots of things. But many of you are young and you're just starting out and you haven't got a clue about anything. So a book like this, this is why I say this is the world's first spiritual Bible, because this is the sort of book that you will go back to forever, for the rest of your life. And even now, I wrote this book. I'm still reading it and I'm impressed with it. And so I'm going to read just a random excerpt, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages or something like this. Listen or don't. And the heading is From Freud and the Brain to Sheldrake and Morphogenetic Fields. Now, who knows anything really about Freud? I mean, don't tell me you know anything about Freud unless you've read 10 books at least. Then Rupert Sheldrake, who knows about Sheldrake? Well, unless you've listened to, you know, 50 of his videos or read any of his books, you know nothing about him and the morphogenetic fields. So, I'll try to explain a little bit of what that is, but you know, I've wrote about it in here to give you the picture, to enable you to grasp things. And so when you listen to me speaking in my videos, and some of you think I'm mad, of course it's because I am coming from a different dimension of consciousness. My consciousness is so vast, it's so broad, because it's got a lot of information, a lot of experience, but not only that, it taps into the Akasha, it taps into the morphic resonance, it taps into the spiritual dimension, to the astral dimension. It's tapped into all those things, and so it's got a great deal going on. Now, here I will tell a story why I think I can discern intellectually as well as physically the morphic resonance field is all around us. Now, Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance reckons that there is a field all around us, like the quantum field, which is kind of like the Akashic records. And this field holds information, like Wi-Fi. You'd all get your heads around Wi-Fi holds information, because modern people have told you that. Well, people thousands of years ago were speaking about the Akashic records. And in recent times, you know, people like Rupert Sheldrake are speaking about the morphic resonance. Why is it that fish swim in schools? Why is it that birds fly in flocks? Why is it that ants convene in colonies? Where does their information come from? Where does an ant's colony information and intelligence come from? It cannot possibly come from those tiny, tiny, tiny little brains, if we have any faith in our modern scientists, which tell you that the bigger the brain, the more intelligent the creature. You see? And so that just doesn't work with ants then, does it? Because they exhibit very, very closely the actions of humans in society. They go to war with other colonies. They build their massive complexes underground. There's termite cities, underground, people, which are 5 and 6 meters wide, long, high and broad. They are massively complex, and they've got a whole bunch of stuff going on with heating systems, cooling systems, food producing systems, and a whole bunch of stuff that you know, the vast majority of people are not aware of. But if any of you, what I'm going to do is, by the way, I'll reduce the price down to £20 from £25, because £20 seems to be a limit in lots of people's psyche, that they're prepared to pay for a book. So to enter into those limited psychological minds, then I'll reduce the figure down to it. Because it's not like I'm hungry for the money, because unless I sell 100,000 books, then you know, the money isn't ever really going to make that much difference to me. But because I've wrote the book, because the cosmos wanted me to write the book, then the cosmos obviously wants the book to be promulgated, and so I have to work with the cosmos to promote it. Now, here I will tell the story why I think I can discern intellectually as well as physically the morphic resonance field is all around us. I am long enough in the tooth now to have had the opportunity to monitor my actions over many years, and in doing so I have analysed many occasions when my actions were outside of the benefit of my human colony. That's to say, my social arena, immediate and extended. At the time of my carrying out certain actions, I knew intuitively, instinctively, consciously that my actions were self-serving and of no benefit to anyone else. In fact, ultimately quite the contrary, as it would often turn out. And yet I proceeded with those selfish actions anyway, as we all do, as we all have done. During my self-analysis over many years, I have monitored very closely the pros and cons of my actions. Subsequently, these days I am in no doubt that once I have contemplated upon a specific course of action, I will be fed somehow, very possibly via morphic resonance, what the outcome of my actions is very likely to be. This information comes seemingly in the form of regular thoughts, but they have a deeper insight behind them, like what we imagine telepathy to be, something more than brain activity, something spiritual. Now, what I'm saying is, people, that when I think about doing something, I have a certain level of enlightenment which tells me what the outcome of that action is going to be. And there's been many times when I was younger that I had this because it's always been natural to me, but I never listened to it, and I fell foul, and I ended up in a lot of trouble because I never listened to my higher self. Where does this higher self get its knowledge from? How does it know the outcome? Is everything preordained? Is everything written? Has everything been lived already? And it's just like a DVD. You know, when you put the laser on one part, it just plays. It's all there from the beginning to the end. Is that how it is? That seems how it is, because there's something, people, that know exactly what's going to happen to us when and where. And so I have an awareness of this, and I've been tapping into it for many years, and I've proven it to be absolutely so. However, the future is by no means set in cosmic concrete, because there are always anomalies to everything pertaining to the quantum uncertainty aspect of life. Things can be planned and calculated meticulously, but there is always the chance that our blueprint of action won't go according to plan because of unforeseen and unpredictable variables. But if we are finely tuned to these paranormal fields, intuition, sixth sense phenomena, collective unconscious, akashic fields, morphic resonance, I've just blown your minds. You see, if you don't know what those words are, intuition, if you haven't studied deeply what intuition is, the sixth sense phenomena, if you haven't studied the collective unconscious of Carl Jung, if you haven't studied Edgar Cayce's akashic fields, if you haven't studied Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, then that's just gobbledygook to you. But in here, it gives you the opportunity to have a foundation, to gain a grounding, and then if you like what you read, then you go and buy the books and you do your own study. So Akashic Records, morphic resonance, and our psyche, which are all very closely related. Then we will know within a high probable calculation what the outcome of our actions is likely to be. Why is this? I can only surmise that either it is because over many thousands of years of evolutionary development, we, the collective unconscious and conscious field, which is the living essence of what we really are, cosmic consciousness, has learned a thing or two about which action is more favourable to the survival of the community as opposed to those which aren't. Instinctively, intuitively, we know when we're doing wrong, don't we? We know if we do this shit, then something's gonna go wrong. It's gonna go pear-shaped somewhere. Someone's gonna be upset, someone's gonna get hurt, and it's not gonna be conducive to society. So why somewhere within our psyches, do we know that? Some of us who are tuned into it. You would think that many people are not tuned into it because they go blind through life, doing all different sorts of negative shit, causing hell for many, many people. When highly tuned into these vibratory fields, we will receive the probable psychically announced outcome of our actions before we act them out. It's as if we can see into the future. Some may speculate that God is speaking to them, or they are being guided by their spiritual guardians. As I have expressed unceasingly, we can project onto our lives whatever notion, concept or belief that we want to, because it is our dream and prerogative to do so. Let us use a scenario premised in human psychology to illustrate this idea of external guidance. Now, this is a true story, which, of course, all of this book is premised on true stories. If we are thinking of having an affair outside of our regular relationship, we may have pangs of guilt or minor anxiety as a preemptive warning of the consequences should we get caught by our partner. So if we are considering to have an affair, our conscience is kind of like, you really want to do that? If you get caught, you're going to get fucked up, right? So we know that, don't we? But what I'm saying is we know something on a much deeper level. Some of us. When we are contemplating or premeditating our envisioned affair, our conscience will send a message to our amygdala, which will drip a few drops of cortisol into our brains that in turn alerts our conscience to the full potential of our actions that could end in divorce and our children being estranged from us. This facet of the response scenario is premised on the certain chemicals being released, which are powerful red flags that are genetically formatted responses created and stored in our minds and bodies throughout our development as a species. This could be where the evolutionary collective unconscious comes into its own. These chemical accompaniments are partners with our thoughts, which create tangible effects in our hearts and stomachs. So the thoughts create the chemicals create the reaction, and then we decide whether we're going to act on our thoughts or not, because we already have preemptive emotional insurgents within our bodies. But if we are going to do something that won't promote any guilt or shame within us, then our brains won't consider it necessary to send out any warning via the appropriate chemicals. In this case, if we cannot rely on our brain chemicals to inform us of the possible outcome, how would we know if our intended actions will be rewarding or destructive to ourselves? Now, if we do something and we're not going to be carrying the guilt because it doesn't pertain to guilt, for instance, if I decide I'm going to climb a mountain, like I did, and I get a preemptive thing, well, that doesn't come out of guilt. That possibly comes from some sort of deep-rooted protection mechanism which throughout millions of years the human being has discovered and archived, that climbing mountains invariably cause problems for the human being. So I would seriously think about, first and foremost, whether you're able to do it, whether you have the strength, whether you have the mental resources, what sort of mountain, what equipment are you going to need. That's what our intelligence and higher self is going to be alerting us to, right? And if you have all those things together, you override that. You go, well, it's going to be an amazing experience. It's going to be very, very arduous for sure, but I may lose my life. Many people do lose their lives, but in the sense of adventure, I want to do it. When I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, I asked the guide how many people die on that mountain each year. He says, I'll tell you when you get down. And then when we got down, he said, many. You don't want to know. Now, before I run away with my mystical conclusion, no, sorry, I've got to get back up here. let me just reiterate. If our intended actions will be rewarding or destructive to ourselves, family, clan, social group, or community as a whole, the answer, in my estimation, is in our psychic connection to our future via morphic resonance. Scott F. Gilbert, American development biologist, proposed that the morphogenetic field is a middle ground between genes and evolution. That is, genes act upon fields which then act upon the developing organism. So, genes, our genetics, carry this information. When things are potentially hazardous, it's going to let us know. Isn't that brilliant? Isn't the body genius? Isn't the mind genius? Isn't the world genius? Isn't the cosmos genius? It's absolutely phenomenal, and we know basically next to nothing about it. Now, before I run away with my mystical conclusion, I have to be fair in my assessment, so I will look at all possible options of how reality manifests. And a valid alternative to the morphic resonance theory reckoning could be that we don't need to invent super mystical fantasies of invisible fields that we tap into when we have perfectly functioning brains to do the same thing. We have rational minds to look at the pros and cons and balance up the odds of success. If our plan of action looks a bit iffy from the higher conscious vantage, then our rational thought process will tell us that the odds of success are low, and then, to add a little flavour to the logical synopsis, the mind produces a full-blown scenario depicting likely events if the unfavourable odds manifest. I.e., you will see in your mind's eye your wife leaving you and taking your kids to go and live with their grandparents in Timbuktu or similar. The mind is a beautiful cosmic computer. It can do all of this wonderful stuff. So why do we need morphic resonance to show us the future? Good question. Hold that thought for a moment. Before we dismiss our final fanciful morphic resonance, first, we better be confident that we know where our answers came from when our brains created all those prophetic scenarios of our wives leaving us. So, how did our brains accomplish all that wonderful stuff? We have been told that we have a particular psychological agency called the conscience, and this agency's job is to prevent us from doing things that won't serve us in the long run. This agency was recognized by Freud, and he called it the superego, which is in direct opposition to the Freudian id, which is the unconstrained animalistic facet of the human being which just wants to satiate the human body's needs, i.e. food, autonomy, sex, etc. So in Freudian terms, we have the id, the ego, and the superego. This way of looking at the human psyche has been dominant for just over 100 years, and we have all grown up with Freudian psychological realm, within the Freudian psychological realm, and most of us don't know anything else. Just because this is all we have ever known, does that mean that is all that there is as a method of looking at our actions as human beings? Let us not forget here that Freud was a staunch physicalist and had no time at all for the supernatural. But if we do have a considerable or consideration for the spiritual and phenomenological, then we are at liberty to look at alternatives, right? Exactly. This is what we are doing here. We are looking at feasible alternatives to what we have been coerced into believing, because a particular theory is more conducive than another as far as governance is concerned. So what I'm saying here is, okay, on the one hand we've got the brain does this and the brain does that, and the conscience tells you this and the conscience tells you that. It's all brain activity. But Rupert Sheldrake says that many things are not brain activity. It comes from the ether, and this is where morphic resonance, comes into its own. It's a field like Wi-Fi is a field, like the Akasha is a field. Consciousness is a field. Consciousness isn't in the brains, people. Quantum physicists say that the cosmos is conscious, and everything within it is conscious. And this is also the philosophy of idealism. Everything is in the mind of God. So, the difference between Freud's accepted hypothesis and Sheldrake's hypothesis, as far as time is concerned, is about 100 years. Sheldrake's hypothesis is only about 20 years old, and Freud's ideas are about 120 years old. Freud's theories are very cerebrally located, as were most of Carl Jung's ideas, such as the collective unconscious. Sheldrake's theory, however, is out there. He is looking for his answer in the ether, in the morphic resonance field theory, as opposed to looking for the answers in our brains. This way of looking at solving the problem has collaborators like the Akashic Records theory and many other philosophers' ideas of what consciousness is. The philosophy of idealism speculates that consciousness is all around us, and when we look at this idea, we can see that there is more potential to make sense of many more facets of the cosmos if we have an adherence to the supernatural. The quantum world is also very supernatural. All spiritual beliefs are premised in the supernatural, and all religions are born out of the supernatural realm. Some readers will remember my listing a few very significant concepts that are entirely outside of our physical world comprehension. Those concepts were consciousness, intuition, God, the self, and the non-physical reality. For those 5 concepts are not remotely understood by science. When what we are doing premising our entire belief system on science. Okay, so let me just go over that again. Those concepts were consciousness. We know nothing about consciousness. We don't know where it comes from, what it is. We don't know anything about it, except that we appear to have it. Intuition. We know very, very little about intuition, where that comes from. Why do we get these gut feelings that we, so often seem to have? God. We know nothing about the notion of God. The self. We don't know what the self is. What self? There is no self. Read Buddhist philosophy and you'll discover that there's no self. And non-physical reality. The reality isn't physical, people. Quantum physics have told us that. They've told us that for 120 years. There's no physical reality here. If those 5 concepts are not remotely understood by science, then what are we doing premising our entire belief system on science? Science can't even answer the most fundamental and potentially meaningful questions that we have. This then is my point as far as morphic resonance is concerned. So, you see, the world is steeped in science, and we think that we're living in the physical world, when in actual fact we're living in an illusory world. We are deluded into the physical reality. There is no physical reality here at all. That has been concluded for 120 years by the accumulation of all human intelligence. All human intelligence ultimately will reveal to us that there is no physical matter, and yet we still continue in the dream as if there is. Well, that's the nature of the dream, ladies and gentlemen. Morphic resonance fits perfectly within consciousness as a phenomenon, an apparent reality, but one that cannot be found. It works with telepathy. It's conducive to the Akasha, the collective unconscious, intuition, the notion of God, and the self being a supernatural phenomenon. If we let go of our brainwashed notion of a physical world, then everything becomes so much easier to understand. By reverting to Occam's razor as the starting point to all inquiries, serves us greatly. In philosophy, Occam's razor is the problem-solving principle that recommends searching for explanations constructed with the smallest possible set of elements. It is also known as the principle of parsimony, or the law of parsimony. Parsimony means parsimony is often referred to as being tight. You don't want to give, but parsimony is reducing something down to its bare essentials, and that's what Occam's razor is. You take the most simplest of explanation. You don't be waxing lyrical about it and hypothesizing about wonderful, crazy things. No, you come back to Occam's razor, this guy called Occam is William of Occam. He coined this phrase because he said what you need to do, it's like shaving. You see, in the old days you used to shave with cutthroat razors, so you shave away absolutely everything. You get down to the skin, basically. That's the answer will probably be most substantial and reliable. So here we go. Occam's razor is used as a heuristic or rule of thumb to guide scientists in developing theoretical models. The term razor refers to the shaving away of unnecessary assumptions when distinguishing between two theories. In this chapter, I have offered various hypotheses to make my case that our existence, alongside everything else in the cosmos, is supernatural. A reality without any physicality at all, only the illusion of physical reality. And so, I would have hoped that scientific theories, which are conducive with a non-physical cosmos, should by rights be grasped at excitedly and eagerly as possible portals of great spiritual and scientific insight. They should be given a lot more attention and respect as a way forward to understanding what is really going on in this existence we call life. As it so happens, there is one such theory that is even being taken seriously by very prominent scientists today, some of whom I will name in the next chapter. Let us leisurely saunter our way through our journey into omniscience as we become closer to God. Now, then I start on here is the cosmos simulation. And this whole simulation thing is Nick Bostrom's baby, and so then it's very important to look into this stuff, people. If you want to know the answers to any of this stuff, you have to consider, is the cosmos a simulation? Because many prominent intellectual people consider that it very well could be. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the advocates, and he is always saying, I'm still waiting for someone to prove to me that this world isn't a simulation. He's a cosmologist, people. And he's out there, isn't he? Having all different sorts of interviews with intellectuals, and he's very, very respected. And yet he's saying that I'm still waiting for someone to prove to me that this isn't a simulation. So he's convinced that this is a simulation. Now, what I'm saying here in this chapter is that morphic resonance is responsible for a great deal more than we would ever even feel comfortable with accepting. If we just look briefly now at an ant colony, if you investigate ant colonies and you see that certain ant colonies will send out scouts to look for other ant colonies of the same breed, they will assess the size of the other ant colonies, and if the other ant colonies are deemed to be smaller than this ant colony will send as many soldiers as it can to kill the defending soldiers of that ant colony, which is the same species. they will kidnap the queen and the larvae and take them back to their colony. Then they will have another queen, and all that larvae, their colony expands even greater. Then they'll continue that by sending out scouts looking for smaller colonies to bring into their own. They will kill these pincer guys that stand century by just sending massive of their own pincer guys, and the sheer inundation of numbers is going to ensure that they will wipe out that colony. That's why it's very important for the ant colony to discern whether the colony that they're going to attack is larger or smaller, because if it's larger, they're fucked. You see, where do ants get this intelligence from? How do ants know how to work in unity to build massive structures? Literally ant cities, people. How do they know how to do this? How do they know how to create cooling systems and keep a constant temperature by opening and closing vents and all this different sorts of stuff? Rupert Sheldrake speaks about his morphic resonance, but he doesn't relate it to ants. That's what I've done, because many, many years ago I looked at ants and I wanted to know how the fuck they do what they do. How do they send out parties to do this, to do that, and how they got all different sorts of parties that some just tend the queen. That's all they do, tend the queen. Some just tend the larvae. Some, you know, dig out all the tunnels. Some are sentries to attack the colony. Some are foragers. You know, they all have their different jobs to do. Who tells them what to do this? You know, how to do that. So I considered that, well, there must be something like the Akashic records, which they are tapping into, like we are tapping into, because I have come to know that none of us know where our thoughts come from, people. We just do not know where our thoughts come from, and this is the thing. And it most certainly isn't conclusive that our thoughts come from our brains, because we can still think when our brains apparently have died and on their operating table, or the line at the side of the road with a car accident and this, that and the other, and maybe it took 10 minutes before this body was resuscitated, and then the astral body came back into the body, but the astral body saw everything, remembered everything, knew what was going on. So therefore then the consciousness isn't in the body, isn't in the brain. Maybe it's in the astral, maybe it's in the soul, maybe it's in the spirit, maybe it's all around, maybe baby, and that's the thing. So anyway, people, this book now on sale for £20 has a lot of stuff, and okay, lots of you will go, fuck, that's over and above my head. Well, if you don't want it to be over and above your head, then you'll learn about it. If you want to accept that it's over and above your head, then you'll never fucking order this book, and you'll never pick up any of the books pertaining to any of this subject matter, and you'll stay flatlining in the narrow conscious realm that you are. You see, if we're going to extend and expand our consciousness, then of course we have to engage ourselves with a great deal of existing knowledge. And we always have to be thinking and creating our own assessment of the world also. Anyway, the link to this book will be down in the comments section, and well, I've done it 1,000 times before, and you know, it doesn't make any difference to you, does it? You know, if 300 people watch this video, then out of 300 people, the chances are there'll be none of you which are sufficiently moved into wanting to read this book, with the absolutely phenomenal amount of subject matter which is in it. And, you know, I suppose laboriously I will read these fucking 11 pages. And those of you that have bought the book, then you can, you know, skip. But for those of you that are still like, what's in that book? Then I'll fucking read it to you. Right, so An unfortunate childhood led towards an auspicious adulthood. This is the beginning. This is in the preface of what took me on this spiritual journey. Your life in their hands. Becoming aware of the rot setting in. Experiencing the numbness of life. Seeking that elusive inner peace. How many of you are seeking that elusive inner peace? You want to know how to find it? Buy the fucking book, idiots. The rising of the phoenix. Something has seriously gone wrong. The long road to egoic reconstruction and spiritual development. Shockingly, I realise that I too am an automaton. Intro into the central theme of my journey. The dark night of the soul. What it means and how to deal with it. The need to press forward, leaving the past behind. No consolation in the dark night of the soul. Patience and perseverance. And finally, the situation for the yogi. The use of myth to accompany our investigation into the dark night. Lots of other instances about the dark night, which is very, very powerful. The dark night of the soul, people, is the realm some of us slip into before we awaken. It's a very, very deep form of depression, of lethargy, of numbness that we enter when we are in our chrysalis stage. We see, prior to this dark night of the soul, we were the caterpillar. Then we have an encounter with something which sends us hurtling through the cosmos, and we enter into the chrysalis stage where everything is just putrefied. It's all dissolved, and then something out of that putrefaction comes a beautiful butterfly which takes flight. This metamorphosis, people, is the most incredible thing, and it is actually a real thing. And so I testify for that in this book. Life's meaning, is there one? Do we need a meaning to justify our existence? The universe does not need a purpose, so why should we? The scourge of boredom and loneliness. The path to spiritual awakening begins. Discovering the unadulterated heavenly bliss does exist. The power of letting go. How I fell down the rabbit hole. Plato's allegory of the cave. What does the allegory of the cave mean? Are we really all one? Is the dream world a real place? The law of attraction put to test. The incredible powers of the mind. Meditation and the mystical bliss of the still mind. The day Jehovah kicked my ass. How can we know if God really is within us? What is love? Varieties of religious experience. When love doesn't live up to our expectations. Many varying alternate states of consciousness. How a shift in perspective changes. Fuck it. I'm done, people. If I can't convince you with reading just a few bits like that, I ain't never going to reach you motherfuckers. So, fuck off and die already. Have a nice day.